Welcome to part 2 of me and PKFT1's Persona 5 Royal discussion. Definitely go check out part 1 if you haven't seen it. I'll have it in the description. In that part, we kind of talk about, like, the first and second semesters and what Royal changed about that, but in this one, we're going to be talking about the third semester.
Right, and like I was saying in the last video, for me, Royal was all about the third semester. You know, that's why I think everybody bought it. They were just so curious, and it's like everything else that's in the base game kind of feels like a cherry on top. However, I think, you know, the strength of the third semester really lies in its characters that it has built up specifically for this kind of final chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, you know, like we said earlier, kind of the part for me that really builds up the first semester is you're introduced to Maruki. He's the counselor at the school. He starts asking you all sorts of philosophical questions, and you know he's meeting with the other Phantom Thieves. He's kind of shadily seeking all of them out. Because where do you see him? You see him like show up at like LeBlanc at one point. I think Yusuke hears about him and he wants to meet with him.
Yeah, just throughout like different random parts of the story, different characters, or like most of the Shujin crew kind of learn about him immediately, but then you have characters like Yusuke who hears about it, and then I think like Futaba ends up going to him at some point, so yeah, they pretty much all go and pay him a visit at some point.
And so the whole time you're like, okay, he's meeting with all of them, and at that point when I knew he's meeting with all of them, like, okay, he's got to be tied into this whole thing at the end. And I think the first moment I would consider, like, you know, really beginning the first semester is when or the third semester, you see the palace with Kasumi, you go in there, and you get to see her kind of transform. Or no, do you see it? No, she doesn't transform yet, right? You don't see her. She
does get her persona and her, like, infiltration garb or whatever, her Phantom Thief outfit.
Okay. So at that point, she gets Cendrillon, and I think you get an idea of what it is, and then she's just kind of like, you leave, and then Morgana's like, oh, we should try to recruit her, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she's just kind of like, whatever, you know, I got more important things to focus on. And I guess she just kind of declines your invitation to join the Phantom Thieves. And, you know, I wonder why sometimes, and I think it is an interesting setup, and as you get into the real beginning of the third semester, you get back from the palace, or Shido's palace, come back, and then you're talking to Sae about, you know, turning yourself in or whatever, and then Akechi shows up.
Then Akechi rolls up. Like, I think at least for me, the moment when Akechi shows up and he's like, I'll turn myself in, was kind of the beginning of, like, my beautiful relationship with the third semester, because there's something so funny and so, like, schlocky about the idea of Akechi taking your place and turning himself in. It's literally like a fan fiction, but I really enjoyed that. I thought that was so funny.
Right. No, that was me too. Like that, because again, I love Akechi to death, just because, I don't know, I can't even explain what it is that I like about him, because, yeah, you know, everybody I know hates him. But that moment for me, like, it seemed so obvious that they were going to bring him back.
Yeah.
But just seeing it and being like, oh my gosh, we're finally seeing what happened after he was in that, you know, after that door slammed. And so you're automatically questioning, is this the real Akechi? Is this, you know, what really happened back there? Was he the one who shot the, you know, imposter Akechi? And so your mind's already going all over the place. And he goes to jail, or not jail, but he at least takes the fall and has to go to court, I guess. I don't know. But you end up actually getting to see what happens at that point in the storyline, which you didn't get to see before. So what? You get to celebrate Christmas, I think?
Yeah, you do. You get to spend Christmas with somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right, because isn't that a point where you get to actually, like, choose... Is that where, like, you can spend it with whoever you're dating?
Yeah, I remember I ended up hanging out with Ryuji because I was really intent on, like, dating Kasumi, because, like, you know, new girl and all. So I spent Christmas with my boys.
Yeah, I think I was at the point where I had done such a terrible job my second playthrough. I think because I was just in such a rush to get to the end, that I did so bad with my confidants that like the only one I had to a point where I could date was On. And I wasn't even that crazy about On. I was just like, well, I guess I gotta date somebody. Because like you said, I wanted to go for Kasumi, but I was confused because at that point she only had the 5 confidant ranks.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, okay, I guess I can't or something. And so so I ended up spending it with On. And then by the time that Kasumi became like an available option, I was like, I feel too guilty, I can't.
See, so I had the opposite problem where I maxed out a lot of the female characters' confidants, but I turned them all down, and it was really painful seeing a lot of that dialogue for the first time. Because, like, some of them handle it a lot better than others. Like, Makoto, at one point, you're just like, yeah, somebody will teach you about love, or whatever it is, and she's like, yes, definitely. And other characters are a lot more, like, visibly let down by it. It's really sad. I think An's is really pitiful. Because it's like, she's basically telling you, please, love me, and you're just like, I gotta go.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason I ended up with her was because, like, it went through that whole event and everything, and I wasn't thinking, and I just kind of jumped into it, and I was just like, well, okay, fine, there's nobody else, so all right. And I got myself tied into it, and then, of course, Kasumi's social link opens up later. But that being said, being able to see Christmas and everything is kind of nice, you know, and I don't remember what happens between that and New Year's. Is there really much of anything?
Not particularly. I think you kind of just hang about. At some point, I think this is actually on New Year's Day, is when you get your first kind of like dream of weird stuff happening and somebody trying to call you, which is Maruki, obviously, and then you wake up and then everything is weird.
What was your first like reaction when you woke up in Shujin, in the dream?
So at this point, I knew Maruki was like a villain and all, because I had been spoiled on that, but I didn't know exactly what was gonna happen. I don't know, I think I'm the only person in the world who felt like satisfaction at all of the characters' sort of dreams being like coming true and it being correlated to Maruki, because I was like, I was right. Because I, of course, did my Persona 5 Schlockulation video where I more or less accurately guessed that, like, Maruki is the main antagonist, and he's using cognition in some way to affect reality and make people's dreams come true.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was kind of just a nice, like, self-gratifying moment for me, where I was kind of like, I was right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, at that point, like, I had pretty much figured it out, but it was just, like, something about it just kind of breaking, because at that point, you spent so many days kind of doing the same sort of thing, and you're waking up and you're running around and you're hanging out with people and you're going into palaces, and then all of a sudden you have this weird thing where you're like in this dream and it's, you know, dark and foreboding, and you hear all the dialogue, if I remember right, of like your friends and stuff and kind of what they talk to Maruki about. And you know, even though it's obvious, it's got that whole mysterious air to it, and chasing, I like the idea of him like following the butterfly through the school and it all being dark, and it was just different, and it was a fun way to kind of throw you into this alternate reality. And I don't know, I thought that was just such a cool moment.
Yeah, it's a really nice way to like kind of smack you in the face and make you realize, all right, it's the third semester. Get ready. Because, like, you know, obviously Persona 5 came out in like, what, 2017? Mm-hmm. Please don't tell me that game's gonna be, it's actually gonna be 5 years old this year.
I know.
Because it came out in Japan in 2016, good God. But yeah, it's kind of been like, at least for me, like 4 years of knowing what happens in Persona 5. And so just being able to get to something that's like totally different was like nice.
And so is it right after that you wake up and it's now the new year or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you wake up, it's the new year, and like you have your plans to go hang out with everybody at the shrine or whatever it was. And then there's a human in your bed with you?
That's right.
I forget if he woke up like with you in the bed the first day or if that happened the day after, but I
think that's the day after, actually.
Yeah, the day after, and then there's just some person at LeBlanc.
And you start talking to him, and I mean, anybody who knows about the third semester, I think everybody knew, oh no, is that Morgana?
Yeah, like that's what we were originally, like even when that character, like Morgana's human form was first revealed, everybody was like, this is human Morgana.
Yeah, everybody kind of looked at it and realized that it was. And what I actually think is kind of funny is I think everybody just expected that to be like how Morgana would look if he was human. But they insert that fun little detail on New Year's where Ann is watching TV and she points out, oh, look at that super hot celebrity, right? And it's the guy that Morgana ends up looking like when he appears. So he wishes himself to be this celebrity, which I think is funny because like in our world, it would be like the equivalent of you waking up and your cat's just like Tom Cruise or something.
That'd be kind of sick.
And it's funny in that context to me. And you talk to him and obviously like it doesn't have Morgana's voice. In fact, I think it is Naegi's voice actor.
I think it might be actually. Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it.
And it's just funny. And that's your first like, okay, this is weird. And then when exactly do you see Futaba's mom?
I don't remember if it was the like New Year's Day or the day after. I'm pretty sure what happens is like you go to the shrine with everybody and everybody's just saying weird stuff. They're like, yeah, me and the track team are gonna hang out, and then Anna's like, oh, I gotta go see Shiho, and then Haru's like, yeah, I gotta take a call from my dad or whatever it was, and then you kind of disperse, and it's just like, what? And then the day after is when like the cognition gets worse, and people start like actually forgetting about you. Like Ryuji doesn't even know who you are.
Oh my gosh, wait, that does happen, doesn't it?
Yeah, because like when you track Ryuji down, he's like, yeah, I think you go to school with me. Do I know you? But he's kind of just talking with his track team buddies.
Oh, I don't even... You're right, he does say that. I'd like completely forgotten about that. Even when I was doing my review, I'd forgotten that, like... Because I guess in that world, he'd have no reason, you know, to know you.
Yeah, and like some of the characters do. I think that just has to do with like how bad the wish fulfillment is, because like Haru knows who you are, like Makoto and Sai know who you are. So it seems like it's just Ryuji, his kind of turn of events and like how he wanted history to go ended up like excluding Joker from his like his past.
Wow. That's very interesting. I don't think I ever really picked up on that. Or if I did, I'd like instantly forgot about it. Because I think the thing that probably threw me off was Ryuji was forgetting, but everybody else knew, so I probably forgot about the fact that Ryuji forgot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because let's think about it, because everybody's wishes there were various things. You know, Makoto, and you also see Makoto just hanging out a lot with Sae, like outside of work, which I think is kind of interesting, you know, because it seems like her wish wasn't just for her father, but also just to have a better relationship with her sister. And then I think the big thing is, well, because you run into Kasumi at the wishing, what is it, like a wishing well or something?
I think it's a shrine.
Shrine, that's what it was. And does she remember everything? That was the thing I was confused on, was if she remembered stuff before or if her...
Well, I'm pretty sure the reason why her desires are not affected is because Maruki already did it to her. He's like, she's already got her, quote-unquote, her fantasy reality. So the big change going on doesn't really affect her.
Right. Yeah, that does make sense. And so I think maybe it's you go back home and you see Wakaba, right?
Yeah, it's either like the night when you go back or the day after when you just see Wakaba.
And you get to talking and, you know, everything's great with them all. And I can't remember if there's anything else weird at the time, but I remember you wake up and they're all talking to Morgana like they know him.
Mm-hmm.
He's just... And it makes you wonder how exactly he, you know, got himself into living essentially with them, with you. And you wake up in bed with Morgana and he makes that weird comment about how like, oh yeah, I used to, you know, snuggle up on your chest at night. Mm-hmm. And then that's when, like, for him at least, he starts to realize, oh wait, that's weird. And I think he starts getting really kind of weird after that and he like leaves. And if I remember right, you're running around like throughout the third semester, and you'll every now and then you come back to LeBlanc, and you'll just see Morgana just standing there thinking to himself. And then there's that one time you can go and talk to him, and he just has his old cat voice again, but like with his new body.
Yeah.
That like threw me so off when that happened. And I assume it was intentional because I guess it was supposed to be him, like, coming back to terms slowly with who he was.
Yeah, definitely. It seems to be it's either that or it's like the cognition isn't fully set in place. There's still like a little bit of wiggle room for like the actual reality to kind of slip in.
And I'm trying to think, is there anything else? Well, we know Akechi shows up, right?
Yeah.
And he comes in, and that was the moment where I was like, I've never been so happy to see Akechi in my life.
I felt like, the same way.
He like comes up to you and he's like, something's going on.
Yeah,
What's going on?
That's pretty good Akechi impression.
And so he like he doesn't really confront you, but he's just talking about how weird everything is. And I can't remember the full discussion you have, but that moment for me was like, because you feel so alienated at that point, because you've spent time with all these characters. And for me, it was like, oh, it was like a breath of fresh air, or like I should say more like a sigh of relief to see someone who's increasingly frustrated with everything going on around you.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how, like, you know, Akechi was always the outcast of the group, but now you're in a situation where it's like the weird freakazoid on the fringe is like your last hope for like normal communication.
And I think you made a good point in your video where you're starting to really see those detective skills of his kind of like go to good use.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not a facade. It's him just trying to like, you know, work with you to gather as much information as you can on what's going on so you can kind of figure out. And I if I remember right, he basically comes by, he asks you all the things you've heard, and he mentions all sorts of things as he does research, like, but basically, you realize you have to try to figure out what's going on, and I'm trying to remember what happens after that.
Okay, so at that point, I think you're like, oh man, I'm trying to remember if you go to Maruki's palace right after that, or if you kind of like take a second. I'm pretty sure you go to Maruki's palace, right?
Oh, that's right, because you're talking with him, and you get a call from Kasumi, and she tells you, hey, I'm seeing that weird palace again at the stadium. And then Akechi overhears the phone call and he's like, oh, palace. And you go over to the palace.
Yeah.
And I think this is, so you infiltrate the palace and you assume that everything that's going on in there is going to be, you're going to find the palace ruler and everything. And so you get to see Akechi and Kasumi, because they've interacted like a few times before this. They know each other, they're acquaintances. But it's like Akechi's true form comes out and you go into these battles and he's just as much of a psychopath as he was when he fought you.
Yeah, I think that's great. I really, really enjoyed seeing Akechi just be this like battle-lusted, kind of pissed off guy. Like, I think that's wonderful to see.
Well, I think for me, what made it nice was it wasn't like a one-time thing. You know what I mean? Like, it's one thing for the, you know, villain to go crazy or whatever at the end in some anime or something. Because they mentioned, like, oh, he made himself go psychotic. And
yeah.
Like, oh, okay, what's that even mean? But then you go into the palace, and he's able to channel that same, you know, character. And it's kind of nice to just know that, oh, it's just part of his personality. And it kind of it makes him this more interesting character, at least in my opinion, where he can just kind of go back and forth, and he just has to, you know, after a battle, he's back to his normal self, and he's, you know, just really cynical about everything. And his voice actually, like, you know, he's not putting on the Detective Prince voice, and so it's kind of lowered, and he's always kind of grumbling about stuff, and it's just like he's so done with everything.
Yeah, it's really great, because, like, in the original Persona 5, it was always kind of hard to tell the difference between, like, which of these facets of his personality is, like, actually how he is. But it's nice to just have a definitive, like, this is Akechi. Like, he's kind of just an asshole. I think that's great.
Right. And I love that. I think it's, like, the first battle you're in, and Kazumi's like, this guy is weird.
Like, yeah, like, dude.
And she, like, has no context or whatever for everything that's going on. And if I remember right, that palace can be somewhat difficult here and there. There's some enemies and stuff that you can get into some battles that are a little tough. At least it was for me. Is there anything that you wanted to say specifically about the third semester up to that point, or like the palace?
I think it's just a really, really great setup for a story because, like, the kind of themes of Persona 5 of, like, rebellion is never really something that I ever found super captivating. Like, you know, obviously I enjoyed being a Phantom Thief and all, but I don't really feel like I finished Persona 5 with any particular message put into my head. But, you know, Royal, the third semester, it just has such an interesting setup of, like, this false reality, and if it's better to live in, like, basically perpetual harmony, or is it better to experience the ups and downs of life? And I think it just asks a really interesting question from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, whether or not you know everything that's going on, like with Maruki and that being what he did, that question still looms. Like, you're seeing all of it. And I think it's nice that the fact that it's a mystery and you don't know why it's happening, it makes you question, like, well, everything seems good. Should I even bother? You know what I mean? Like, even at that point, you're like, why would the palace ruler want to be doing this? What do they gain from this? And
yeah,
and it makes sense as you know, uncover who it is and everything. And I think that happens pretty soon on in the third semester, at least after what we've talked about. I think you run into Maruki, correct? Or no, before you run into him, you run into all those TVs, right? Where they're showing you all the flashbacks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What did you think of all of Kasumi's backstory?
I enjoyed it. I wouldn't say that, like, Kasumi isn't really a character I feel like I can make a whole video about, but I did enjoy it. I did kind of like the twist of, like, her actually being her sister, and I feel like it's one of those kinds of things, if I were to go back and play through Royal, it would kind of, like, click with me a lot better, because now I have the knowledge to examine the scenes more closely and be like, you know, whenever some weird thing happens with Kasumi's dialogue or whatever, I can be like, oh, it's because she's Sumire, instead of it just being, like, some weird random thing that's not really explained.
Yeah. And I think it just sets up her character almost more than anything to just, you know, coming to grips with things. And I think, like, you couldn't have Maruki without Kasumi and vice versa. You couldn't really have Kasumi without Maruki. They kind of in some ways justify their existence for the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a really fun kind of dynamic that you have one that's kind of your age, and then of course one that's an adult. And you get your first taste of, you know, Maruki and his true intentions at that point. He's got the slicked back hair, he's got the snazzy suit, and if I remember right, he tells you all these things, and Kasumi kind of breaks down, and he swoops in with his tentacle monster. What's his persona's name?
Azathoth.
Azathoth. Didn't you say that's like, I can't remember what it is.
In H.P. Lovecraft's stories, the entire universe is just the dream of this god called Azathoth, and if he were to wake up, all of existence would stop, because, like, it is just his dream.
Right. That's right. Yeah, I remember you talking about that. And I find that interesting, because like you said, that's a perfect fit, too. And so you have what is it, like a first battle with Maruki, and does he just tell you everything then and there?
I think he gives you the kind of general synopsis of what's going on. He's like, yeah, I'm making this a better reality, and Sumire is, like, a lot happier being Kasumi and whatever else. I don't think he tells you, like, all the details. You kind of learn most of that going through the palace, but yeah, he gives you enough to kind of, like, figure out what's going on, at least.
And so that first introduction to Maruki, I think that may have been just the moment in the game where it all kind of comes together, and you get the reveal and him talking about stuff, and him taking Kasumi, for me, was like, whoa, that's wild. Like, just everything that's going on, and kind of seeing him in this darker light, it just kind of made everything that built up to that moment feel that much more important or earned. And I think he gives you, like, a date, and he's like, hey, come back on this day and we'll fight again or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when you and Akechi decide you're gonna go basically try to wake everybody up. And Akechi's like, you do that, I'm gonna go do some detective work. And that was I love this whole portion, because they just tell you, like, just go talk to everybody, go survey, and then report back. Was there anything in that moment that you enjoyed or anything that like surprised you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like pretty much all of them, I felt like at least some amount of emotion of like a kind of sort of feeling of almost regret in letting them know, like, yeah, dude, actually Shiho is supposed to be in the hospital, or actually your dad is dead. And it's like, even for some of the characters that I do like, but I'm not the most attached to, like Haru, for whatever reason, hers really got to me. Just seeing her dad be like a nice guy, and they're like, oh yeah, this looks like a good place for a new Big Bang Burger. And having to go up to her and basically tell her, that guy's dead. It's like, man, it's rough. And I think that's like, to me, that's kind of the epitome of why I think the third semester is so good, is because there is that feeling of like, ooh, man, this hurts.
It's like you have to pull out all their fingernails one by one.
Yeah.
And I love that when they give you dialogue, it's like they only give you things that you can hint at, and then they make you say like stupid things like, I'll be waiting for you. You know, like it's like so intentionally mysterious and to give them time to think about it. And I can't remember when they all, oh no, that's right, because don't they have that moment they all like meet up at like LeBlanc or something?
Yeah, this is after you and like Kasumi and Goro, or I think it might actually just be you and Goro. You go to the palace to try to retrieve Sumire, and then they all show up a little bit after.
Oh yeah, that's right. Because they all kind of start remembering, and they all meet up, and they all start talking about it, and there's that really jarring moment. So they're all reflecting on things, and then there's that weird moment where like the glass shatters.
Yeah, Morgana kind of just like pops back into his cat form.
Right, yeah. And he remembers he's a cat and everything, and then they, I guess, automatically realize, oh, we need to go into the palace, which I think they remember because Morgana mentions, like, oh, I heard they went over to the stadium.
Yeah, that, come to think of it, like, if Morgana wasn't there with you, they would have no idea where to go. Yeah, so good job on that one, Morgana. Like, imagine if that happened if Morgana wasn't there, and they're like, all right, let's go. Where?
Right, exactly. And you know, I think it's funny because you gotta think about it this way. They come back into the battle, and they now have to cooperate with, well, they know they're fighting Maruki, but afterwards, and we'll talk more about the fight, but they have to come to terms that they have to team up with Akechi, who is not just a bad guy, but literally the murderer of various characters that are all related to them.
Yeah, Akechi has not like done anything of benefit to any of these characters, like at all.
Right. And so that whole idea, I think, is just so funny and interesting because you have to cooperate with him because he's one of the only people who can help you in this situation, and he does serve a purpose. Like, it's the first time Akechi's being genuinely helpful, and he's not in it for like, well, as far as you know, he's not in it to like backstab you and everything.
Yeah.
You could say it's a selfish motivation, but there's no reason for you not to work with him at that point. But as they get into the palace, if I remember right, there's that fight, and you actually have to fight Sumire and Cendrillon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, that fight was terrible.
Was it? I don't remember it being too bad.
No. The fight was fine. It was just...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, what you're doing is wrong.
Right. Every time you hit her, she's like, why? Stop killing me. I want to be Kasumi. Whatever. Yeah, I just remember, like, you just feel so bad throughout that fight. And then I don't remember what happens next, honestly. Do you remember?
Yeah, you get Sumire back, and then, like, Maruki is like, okay, well, by the time this day happens, it's kind of over. Like, something I really like about Maruki is the sense of, like, sort of fairness he has about everything. Like, he genuinely believes that this way is the right way, but, like, he's at least gonna give you a chance to try and stop it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So he's a very honorable kind of guy. He's like, you know what? On this day, this is how long you got. Good luck.
Yeah, that's true. And Maruki is just... like you said, like, he's obviously doing things to keep things the way they are, but you're right, he's not there to kill you, at least at this point in time, and he's just there to have you consider. that seems what he's really pushing is take the time to think about it and really think it through. Is this what you really want to do, or are you doing this out of frustration? And so I know you go back, and I guess you basically start infiltration in the palace, right? Because Sumire kind of recovers. You all kind of learn more about her, and she kind of accepts that that's, who she is. And you decide you're going to go into the palace. I think this is where it really starts getting interesting, at least for me. Because you go into the palace, and unless I'm skipping over something, let me know. I think that's when you start stumbling upon... Is that when you start stumbling upon, like, the tapes?
Yeah, all throughout the palace, you start discovering these tapes about, like, Maruki's past and what happened with his girlfriend and, like, his research into cognitive science and how he got his persona.
And I have to say this. So, my first time playing Royal, I had this moment, like, I thought it was a light bulb moment, and I thought it was about to be the craziest connection in anything I'd ever seen, where... So the first tape, there's his girlfriend Rumi, and she lived with like her parents or something, and there was some guy who like broke into their house, and I can't remember if he like killed her parents, but she at least got attacked, and she was like completely traumatized by it, and she's like in this bed, and Maruki is talking to her because he's her boyfriend, like trying to comfort her and everything. And she starts talking about like, oh yeah, because all this stuff happens, and then there's what happens, like there's some weird wave that comes over her. I think Maruki hears his persona talking to him, I am thou art I, or something in that vein. And then she has this weird wave come over her, and she calms down, and then all of a sudden she basically turns into a different person. And she starts talking about like, oh, I live with my grandparents in the countryside, and and this and that. And I remember, because like while this was happening, there was this really ominous cut outside the window, which I thought was weird because like Persona doesn't really do cuts like that very often, like away from the action while they're talking. And it looks out the window, and the sky is like bright yellow. And then I started thinking, wait a second, somebody broke into their house, somebody tried to kill her, and she's living in the countryside. And then I was like, wait a second, is this a Persona 4 connect? Like, I thought that they were setting up somehow that Rumi was going to be connected to the Persona 4 culprit, and that character tried to kill her, and that they were setting her up living in Inaba, and that was how Maruki got involved in all of this and wanting to change the world for the better. I thought they were setting that up for like a split second. I was like, there's no way they're doing this. Of course, that's not at all what they did.
Right.
But it really made me think for a minute. And I just thought, man, I thought the yellow sky, the reference to the countryside, somebody attacking her that we didn't know who was a culprit. And anyhow. Oh, and the other thing was they were watching a VHS tape on like an old CRT TV. And I thought at that moment, like I knew that had to be what it was. Obviously. I don't know, did you make any sort of connections like that while you were watching that tape?
I did not. I don't think the VHS to Persona 4 comparison came to my mind.
Yeah, and so I feel bad because like the rest of the time I was going through the tapes, I was like waiting for the other shoe to drop and like them to make the connection, and it never happened. And then I like set myself up for disappointment because I thought that's where they were going. And then with each tape I saw, he's talking to his buddy and he's talking about doing his research and everything. And I'm like, okay, none of this is connecting to that. Okay, no, that was just nothing. I'm so disappointed. But it didn't really matter in the end because even on its own, it's still great.
Oh yeah, it's great. Like, looking back, I think all of the other Persona 5 palaces should have been structured a lot more like Maruki's. And I think just part of why I like him so much is because, like, every other one of these villains, like, with the exception of Futaba, she's kind of the anomaly, are, like, they're shitty bad people that need to be stopped. And their desires are inherently kind of selfish. Whereas Maruki is the only one who's, like, good.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of fun to think of how you can weaponize selflessness, And they take that and they run with that whole idea, and they just kind of show you, it's him basically enforcing the good of the world upon them, and you're gonna like it, that kind of perspective. And throughout it, I like that palace. It gives you kind of a deeper look into his psychology and why he thinks the way he does. And you go through all those tapes, you find out about his buddy, you find out they don't want to build his research lab, they don't think that, they're not convinced of the research, if I remember right, to fund the project.
Yeah.
And so you eventually stumble upon, what is it, like some sort of, not cognitive test, but it's like a test where they basically ask you various questions and you have to pick like an elevator to go up.
Yeah, I really like that. I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah.
Just trying to solve a puzzle from the perspective of like what somebody else would think, I thought was really smart. I got 2 of them right, and the last one I got wrong. Yeah,
I think that's what I did too. I don't remember any of the questions though. So if I'm not mistaken, wasn't it you were supposed to answer like what Maruki would do? Or what he thought the right answer was?
Yeah, that's the idea, is that you're supposed to answer it from like what Maruki would probably think about the question.
Right. Because it all had to do with stuff, if I remember right, that kind of had to do with him. Like, it mentioned like, oh, somebody's in trouble. What would you do? And there was the thing, I think the right answer on one of them was like, oh, run away or something, because that was what he did when the person attacked his girlfriend or whatever. If I remember right, it was like something along those lines.
Yeah, I think that was the first one.
And then I don't remember the rest of them. But yeah, like you said, that I thought that was just a fun way to represent where he was emotionally, and it gave you a better understanding of the character, and it also, of course, just implements its way into the actual gameplay. And yeah, you're right. Like, that would have been such a perfect addition to other characters' palaces if they had stuff that was more along those lines that somehow deepened the character just through gameplay.
Yeah, like, obviously I'm not expecting, like, to feel sympathetic towards Kaneshiro or whatever, but just those little nuggets of, like, oh, here's kind of what led him down that path would have done so much for so many of these villains.
So you go through that, and then
you make progress in the palace, and then eventually you have to switch to mementos for a while. Because, like, there's the whole new area in mementos you have to go through.
Yeah, why don't you talk about that for a bit? I feel like I've been talking too much.
Yeah, it's pretty much just like mementos, except with white paint over it. It's pretty much just the same. You go through the Holy Grail area. I thought this was actually really cool, how, like, you get to the Grail area and you think, all right, it's gonna be here, and then it just keeps going further and further. I also like Jose showing up, and he's like, man, the flowers here taste like shit. It's like, this isn't good. But yeah, beyond that, it's pretty much just like, it's just ultra mementos. You're just making your way up.
Mm-hmm. And don't you see, like, all of, basically, like, the tendrils or whatnot, because he's associated with Azathoth, and they're all kind of, like, going through mementos, and if I remember, you find out that that's kind of how he was able to do what he did. He kind of worked his way through mementos into the public's cognition so he could grant various wishes.
Yeah, he's basically blasting his actualization power through mementos, because that's like the collective conscience and everything.
Right. And you find out, I think, either through Lavenza, because she, like, shows up to school one day, and she tells you to, like, meet in the, it was, like, in the, I think in the old office that Maruki used to use.
Mm-hmm.
And you all meet there, and it's kind of funny, because you have to basically talk about your progress, and you're asking her all sorts of questions about how Maruki was able to do all this stuff. And everybody comes, and I think it's like Akechi and Yusuke have to, like, sneak in like gym uniforms.
Yeah.
So everybody has to, like, basically sneak into Shujin. And she essentially just tells you that, yeah, after Yaldabaoth was killed, there was a power vacuum, and basically Maruki found out about it. And while you're doing your giant final battle with Yaldabaoth, Maruki's sneaking around in mementos, ready to take the basically to seize power once you defeat him. That's how it went, right?
Something like that, yeah. a lot of the kind of nuance of exactly how Maruki does that kind of went over my head, because it's like, you know, it's a fictional story, whatever, they can make up whatever about how he spread his power through mementos, but I'm sure there's stuff you can kind of pick at and be like, well, how did this work? But I don't know, there's never anything about it that immediately stuck out to me as being like contradictory to Persona 5, so I was fine with it.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting concept. I think, like you said, they probably go a little too out of their way to go into all of it, but it made, you know, a certain amount of sense. And so, yeah, I like the idea of him using mementos to tap into their cognitions and basically able to create this entire world out of it. And that's when you open this new part of the palace. What's the final part of the palace? It's like it has like, you see like weird statues of like Rumi floating around and stuff, and
yeah, it becomes progressively less like a lab and more like just heaven, essentially.
Didn't they say it was like supposed to be like the Garden of Eden almost?
Yeah, the very last kind of spot before you like climb up to Maruki himself is basically just the Garden of Eden.
And I mean, that's a pretty cool, like, striking area that's like visually interesting, and I think they have you do some puzzles, and then of course finally you get to the giant staircase to the top of, what was it, like a tree or something, and you go all the way to the top of it, and that's when you finally get to start your fight with Maruki, which is easily, I would say, the best part. But
yeah, well, right before that, you of course have the moment where you give him the calling card, and I think that's one of the best moments in the whole game, is when you meet up with him to give the calling card, and like Akechi is there. It's like, oh, it's so good.
Right? Yeah, I'd almost forgotten about all of that, and you know, he knows Akechi is there listening in, which I think is funny because if you think about it, because he has that whole moment where he's like, Akechi, you can come in, and Akechi comes in, and they're like, how do you know he was there? But Maruki, you know, how do you, well, no, I take that back. I'm trying to figure out how exactly Maruki knew what Akechi's wishes or was. Because, I mean, I guess he could have tapped into the public's cognition, and that's how he figured it out. But there's that whole thing about, is he dead? Is he alive? And they basically tell you that, oh no, that's what it was. Doesn't he tell you that it was your wish that brought him back?
Something like that. I think it's basically like, in Maruki's, because it's pretty much based on what Maruki's perception of your happiness is. It's not like a definitive objective, like this is what makes you happy. It's kind of just his interpretation. But I guess in his mind, like happiness for Akechi would be, you know, freedom. Which explains how he's not in super jail.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, because he's even confused by that. Because he mentions, like, when he first gets out, he's like, yeah, I talked to, like, the warden at the prison, and they were just like, no, you're free to go. Or no, he was talking to somebody, and they wouldn't believe his confession. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that does make sense. And I think it's at that moment, like you said, you meet with him, and he basically tells you, you know, this is your last chance to accept. I hope you'll consider it. And you give him the calling card, and then he just is kind of like, all right, well, I guess I'll see ya.
Yeah, it's so great because it's like there's no malice. He never slips into feeling like a villain. Because, you know, I feel like this is something I'll praise P5R for endlessly, is that there were so many moments for Maruki to be like villainous, you know? There could either be the moment where he's like, oh, I'm gonna beat you up or whatever, like in the real world or whatever it may be, but it's just like, it just feels like a fair competition of ideas. And it's not really the kind of thing that, like, Maruki wants everybody to be happy, right? And so I think the idea of spreading any sort of, like, negativity to any of these people is just so counterintuitive to what he's about, that he's gonna oppose you, but he's not gonna, like, make your life hard, you know?
So then you go and fight him.
Yes. I think this kind of, like, final boss gambit is, like, probably my new favorite final boss just in Persona. It's definitely up there. It's either number 1 or number 2, but it's just such a great series of events.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because you first get there, and, you know, it's just him with Azathoth, and it's kind of like your typical boss battle, and it's very slow, if I remember. The first part of the battle is just, you don't do much damage to him. You have to, like, hit all his tendrils, and then once they're all down, you can actually do some real damage. And that whole time, he's I love this part of the battle because every time it like goes through a turn, Maruki will make a comment at like whoever is on in your party and will be like, he'll basically try to convince them and be like, hey, are you sure you want to do this? Wouldn't you be happier if, you know, your dad was still alive, Makoto? I can make that happen for you.
Yeah, it's like, he's all he wants you to do is just like stop and accept like happiness. And it's so sad, the idea that, like, I brought up this comparison in my Maruki video. It's like if you showed up to Christmas with a whole bunch of presents and nobody wants any of the presents you're offering. That would be the most heartbreaking thing ever, and that's kind of just like how Maruki feels.
Right. I think that's a really apt comparison. And he continues to do it, like, the whole time. Like, he's never dissuaded after you, well, I mean, upon, like, the final defeat, but, like, up to that point, you know, he's still, even though he's fighting you, it's basically to kind of just suppress you guys from, you know, changing reality more than, you know, him wanting to actually kill you.
Yeah, no, he doesn't want any harm to befall you in the slightest.
And I think you go through that first fight, and then there's that second phase. And is that when he calls upon Adam Kadmon?
Yeah, that's when Azathoth turns into Adam Kadmon.
Yes. And this is when he just kind of goes crazy on you. And I think at this point is he standing in front of Adam Kadmon? Because then there's that other point where he gets like sucked inside of Adam Kadmon. Can't remember.
Yeah, the first, like, or the second phase, I guess, is just you against Maruki, and then, like, Adam Kadmon's kind of just there, and then he goes insane, and he's like, alright, let's fuse. And then that's when he starts to really, like, overpower you.
Yeah, and if I remember right, they show the treasure, and the treasure is like this torched thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, you get the treasure, and then it's like he wills back the treasure to himself. He, like, sucks it back to himself. But yeah, you have this super awesome battle between you and Adam Kadmon, who has just a wild design, and he's just massive and towering over all these buildings. And by the way, Maruki's outfit, what did you think the first time you saw his true outfit?
I really like the outfit. I think my only kind of complaint about it is that the headpiece he has is a little bit too long. I think it would have looked better if that was kind of trimmed down, but otherwise I really like it because it's like, it's simple, but it's elegant and it's kind of powerful looking. It looks like something like a demigod would wear, you know? So right. Yeah, I really like the attire.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I don't know, it's got this very imposing kind of regal look to it that, you know, I think that's kind of what I was looking for almost in what the final villain would be as opposed to Shido. Well, I guess you have Yaldabaoth, but talking about, you know, the main villains, you know, Maruki really fills that void for me and changes how I felt about my fight in Persona 5 and kind of the ending, because it takes all those issues I had of it feeling impersonal between the battles you have with everyone, except for maybe Shido, but still, you don't know Shido that well. You only know that he got you in trouble. And it really takes all those complaints and it bundles everything up from the game leading up to that point, and it delivers this really satisfying battle. And it all kind of comes to a crescendo at that point when, you know, because you've talked to Maruki about everything. He knows everything about you. He knows, you know, that you're Phantom Thieves. He knows the struggles you've had, all individually as well. And he's tried to offer you this gift. You've rejected it. And now I think he's just pissed off. And so he basically charges up this giant punch through Adam Kadmon. And I guess he's just trying to break you at that point.
Yeah, it seems like, so something I found really interesting about Azathoth is that, like, Azathoth is the most evil persona being used by one of the best, like, nicest people. Like, just imagine if somebody like, you know, Shido or, like, Akechi had Azathoth with that kind of power. The level of just malicious shit they could do. But no, like, right. the Cosmos were fortunate enough to just give it to Maruki, who's just like, I will use the power to brainwash people to make them happy. So it seems to me like, obviously the persona is kind of a reflection of the self, but there's these sort of freakazoid personas that just do weird shit. Like, you know, Akechi is able to make people go crazy, and like there's just like weird personas that exist. So I think it's cool that Maruki has such a unique persona and something that could be so evil, but he's just using it for like good stuff.
And then there's, and again, like that evolution into Adam Kadmon is just so immediate, you know? And just, I don't know if that's just supposed to essentially be like his will that's just making it evolve because he's like, well, I need to win this, and so now I need to call upon the power of Adam Kadmon, and it's hard to say, but yeah, I mean, it just goes to show how powerful of a character he is, you know, in and out of battle. But I think there's that moment where, you know, he comes to punch you, and then I think all the Phantom Thieves basically are like, hey, let's team up and hold it off, and Joker, jump on him. Essentially is what they say, right?
Yeah, they're pretty much like, go get him.
Yeah. And I've got to ask you, so what was your thoughts when this whole moment happens? He grapple hooks up, and then he jumps on top of him.
Oh, I thought it was rad. It's such an anime, like, final boss fight. Like, obviously, the fight against Yaldabaoth also was, but it's just, like, there's such a perfect pace and kind of build up to it, to where it goes from, like, you know, Azathoth to Adam Kadmon, then Maruki with Adam Kadmon, and it all just really culminates in this, like, really, really hype moment before it kind of slows down again for the more personal one-on-one fist fight. But yeah, I thought it was a great kind of like just release of the hype and the tension you were feeling at that moment. It was great.
Yeah. And I mean, it is in so many ways. I know you mentioned like how Rebellion wasn't necessarily the strongest message in the first one. Like, it's obviously like it makes sense, but it doesn't really become any deeper than just rebelling against, you know, the man in P5. But P5R, you kind of see this other side of what rebellion is and what it means, and how it really, because in some ways Maruki is rebelling, and so you see this other weird interpretation of rebellion and his way of delivering justice, and then you see the Phantom Thieves' ways of, you know, delivering justice and kind of counteracting and balancing these things. And so I feel like in some ways it does expand that theme of rebelling against whatever it is that's holding you back. And I think in this case, you know, like, they learned so much along the way from the original Persona game. They had to get over all their problems. You know, you have to deal with death of loved ones. You have to deal with the hand that the world hands you. And you know, if they give in to Maruki at that point, it's just throwing everything they learned away into the trash and just, you know, basically becoming complacent with everything and having everything handed to them. So I really like that, because I do think that it makes that feel like a slightly deeper message.
Yeah, definitely. Like, Persona 5, it was the kind of game where it's like, you could obviously have a lot of discussions about different stuff. I mean, we spent like an hour or so just talking about it, but it was one of those kinds of things where it's like, the debates about Persona 5 only went as deep as like, what's going on with Akechi, or why is this bit of the writing like this? Whereas with the stuff in the third semester, I think it gets into a lot more like philosophical, actual like debate about worldview and morality and stuff like that, which I think is really interesting.
Absolutely. And I think that should mark a success for Atlus. Like, I think people are, like you said, I mean, we're obviously talking about it now. It is sparking that like thought process, and people are having to think deeper about the media they consume. So I think anytime you can actually do that and get people to vocalize those types of thoughts, you probably did a pretty good job at you know, making that theme manifest through your story.
Yeah, like, I've kind of had this belief for a while that, like, a creation is successful if it's either entertaining or meaningful. And, like, obviously Persona 5 had a lot of themes and stuff that I liked, and it was obviously extremely entertaining, but I feel like it was kind of missing that component of, like, man, let me think about this, like, from a philosophical angle, the way that, like, Persona 3 especially made me think. So now that that's kind of been put into the game, I think it's, like, taking it to another level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you have that moment, of course, you know, you're standing on top of there, and I like that it just breathes. Like, it gives you a moment to just sit there. You're standing on top of Adam Kadmon's head with your gun pointed to him, and you can just sit there and wait, which I did, because I just liked watching the little animation of him standing there. Mm-hmm. And then it has, you know, the fire prompt, and you shoot your gun and then you say the dorky line of checkmate, and it goes through and it hits him on his mask that was a little too tall, and you have that really epic wide shot of just Adam Kadmon like falling down and kind of dissipating, and then I feel like the best part of the fight is still to come, because you get down there and then, like, I think you described it well in your video. You have that fight with Maruki one-on-one, and it's kind of just this, it's like you're just having to, I don't know how to describe it. It's like you're just beating all his frustration out of him.
Yeah, it's like, I feel like Maruki is a lot less mad at you and just more mad at the world, which I think is such a compelling, like, character motivation. It's just, like, anger at society or the way things are. Because, like, Persona 5 talks a lot about, like, elements of society. Like, Shido is the main bad guy, and he's, like, essentially going to become a dictator and whatever else. So I think that really, really works for Maruki, is just being, like, the final bad guy of the game. And somebody that you're opposed to is this guy who genuinely wanted the world to be a better place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because, like, that's basically just what you were doing in a different ways. You were taking down bad elements of society. It's more just, like, Maruki is just upset at the human experience as a thing. Which I think is an even more kind of grand way of thinking about, like, changing the world.
Right. And you gotta wonder, like, were the Phantom Thieves completely in the right doing that? Like, because what if just one of the Phantom Thieves wanted to live in that world? You know what I mean? If they didn't all come together on that, because who would be the one to have to convince Makoto, if she didn't already agree to it, that, yeah, you just gotta have to live with a world where your parents are dead. Yeah, we could fix it, but we're not going to, So there is that aspect where if they hadn't come all together, and maybe there would have been more conflict in how I would have really viewed, because, like, the way I see it now, I'm like, yeah, they're right. They should take down Maruki. But if I think about it harder, the moment one of them would start to question whether or not they should actually do it, I think would make it a lot tougher for me to try to reconcile with who was right,
Yeah, like, this is a little bit getting into Persona 3 spoilers. I won't, like, get totally in-depth on it, but Persona 3's ending has a similar sort of thing going on, where it's like, the different characters have completely different philosophies about whether or not they should fight the final boss, So I think a little bit of that would have done a lot, but as it is, I think it's fine, just because the Phantom Thieves are already such a cohesive, like, group that more or less, they've kind of gotten past the point in, like, the Okuma arc where it was like, they were all kind of fighting for different stuff.
Right.
But yeah, I think an extra little scene or whatever of the characters kind of having doubts about whether they should or shouldn't would have done a lot, but I think it's pretty good as it is.
Oh yeah, for sure. And so you get into this final fight with Maruki, and how cool is it just to get that prompt to just punch Maruki?
Oh man, it's radical. It's so great.
It's just like one of those things where, again, it was kind of like the same moment, there are these little things that just kind of break the mold. And when you get those moments, it just is like, oh, this is cool. This is different. And, you wail on each other for a while. Then he just kind of falls to the ground and, like, completely gives up, to the point where I don't even think he wants to be alive in that moment.
No, he's basically just like, yeah, just let me die, dude. Like, my grand plan didn't work. I was stopped. Like, there's nothing left for me.
Which I find interesting, because I don't think there's any other villain that you get to that point where they just want to die. You know what I mean? Like, his change of heart is instantaneous at that point, more or less. I mean, it took a while to get there, but at that moment, he realizes it. And I think at that point, like, you have willingly changed his heart. Like, he has changed his heart on his own at that point. He kind of gave up. But at the same time, like, you had to actually basically do everything you could to stop these other villains, and then they would have to wait a few days to go through the full change of heart. But with Maruki, I don't even think you have to steal his treasure. You just basically defeat him, and he's like, all right, you win.
Yeah.
So I don't know how deep his heart was really, like, obviously it was deep into it, but the fact that he's willing to give up, I think says a lot about him too as a character.
Yeah, like, the palaces are a lot more about distorted desires than evil necessarily. And I think, like, Maruki's just happened to be a quote-unquote good desire that he took to such a crazy extreme. So I think that's kind of cool, just how he kind of, like, dissolved the palace almost of his own volition.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And as it starts dissolving, everybody's freaking out, stuff is falling apart. Morgana wishes upon a star, turns into a helicopter like they joked about way earlier in the game. And then I think like everybody's in the helicopter. I also have to point this out. So they go and they, I guess Maruki almost falls down this bridge because he basically doesn't care. Joker catches him. And then the helicopter flies to them. But before that, they have this weird little moment in the helicopter, like as a throwaway comedy bit. And they're all in the helicopter and they make mention, oh, we're all standing on top of Akechi. And he's, just there and he's like, could you get off of me, please?
Yeah.
And I didn't think much of it, right? And then I realized, oh, wait, that's the final time we ever see Akechi.
That's right. He kind of just vanishes after.
Yeah. It's like, that's kind of a weird way just to like end Akechi's story. And I mean, here's the thing, like his story didn't really matter beyond the fight. Like you already had your moment with him. But I just think it's funny that that's how they, that was the final look you get at Akechi. I mean, aside from other stuff, but I just always found that kind of funny. Anyhow, so from there, it's just, the ending, right? I don't quite remember.
Well, basically what happens is because you've kind of defeated Maruki, like, reality sort of goes back to the way it was expected to be, which is you talk to Sai. Sai is like, yeah, we need your help to bust Shido. And then it kind of plays out as per normal throughout, like, in normal Persona 5.
What, you say bye to everybody? And, I guess, they actually added White Day, right?
Yeah, they did. There's a whole extra date.
And you get to go on your big old fancy date with, like, 3 different parts to it. And you have Sojiro giving you all this advice. And you have to, like, go buy flowers. And you have to make the reservation. And there's that weird little moment where they have Sojiro basically tell you, like, oh, I know a place. I'm going to call it up. And he calls up whatever restaurant it is, and then he says, or he has you call them, you say that, like, Sojiro. And they're like, oh my gosh, Sojiro? Of course, we'll get you a reservation. It's like, what the heck? How did Sojiro, like, what are Sojiro's connections? Was it when he worked for the government? I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it's just the fact that he's taken so many women there and spent so much money that he's kind of like a VIP. It's kind of like how if people at casinos spend a lot of money, they become like platinum rewards or whatever. It just means you spent a lot of money and they like you. So I'm pretty sure it's just like, man, that guy's giving us a lot of money. Let's open a table.
Okay, that does make sense. I always wondered, I'm like, that's an interesting little detail. But, and the White Day date is great. You get to impress them with the view and the flowers and whatever. And, then I think it just cuts directly to, like you said, where you're saying goodbye to everybody. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty much the same, except for the fact that I think if you talk to somebody, like, I think they're, like, in front of the movie theater or something. Or maybe it's in front of the... Maybe it's in front of the place.
Well, with Akechi?
Right,
yeah. If you go and you talk to the jazz club guy, he's like, I haven't seen that Akechi guy around lately. It's kind of weird. You're, like, the only person he ever brought in here with. It's like, oh. And then he realizes he still has the glove.
So they're obviously being like, kind of cheeky about the fact that, oh, he still owes you that duel.
Yeah.
And everything. It's like, all right, well, I guess we'll see that eventually. But I think aside from that, because if I remember right, Kasumi's like gone. She's gone on like a trip or something. And so she isn't around when you're leaving. And they changed the ending. And I gotta say, I don't like the ending as much. I don't know how you feel.
I'm kind of two minds on it. I definitely feel as if this ending feels a lot more catered to Royal, because it's like, you have Maruki who shows up, and that's like one of my favorite scenes in the whole game is when Maruki shows up in the cab. I had tears in my eyes, dude, because it's like, oh yes, Maruki, I get to see him one more time. But yeah, I definitely like both versions for different reasons. Like, the original feels a lot more like a goodbye to the Phantom Thieves, whereas the new true ending kind of feels like, I don't know, a goodbye to Persona 5 Royal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Because my thing was, I was like, man, it just seems weird that, like, it feels more impersonal with him and his, like, buddies, because you go to the train and they don't even like get out of the vehicle to say bye to him or anything. It was just kind of weird to me. I mean, obviously they're seeing him again, but it was just one of those things where it's like, man, I really liked just that whole part where he's in the van with all of them, and they're all traveling together, and he sticks his head out the window. Like, I always loved that ending. But you're right. Now that you put it in that perspective, it makes more sense, because it really does focus on Maruki's goodbye to you, and then you bump into Kasumi as you're going onto the train, and then you get that post-credits scene, which is just like, I just had to roll my eyes, where you see Akechi walking in the background and he's still alive.
See, I was kind of like expecting it, because it's like, of course there's going to be a little something at the end, and I'm like, okay, we didn't see Akechi. Akechi is the most popular Persona 5 character, basically, so where's my Akechi tease, That's kind of my train of thought. And yeah, he shows up for a second. Right.
And so, they're obviously hinting at things beyond Persona 5 Royal. We got Scramble. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, Scramble is more of a sequel to Persona 5 than it is Persona 5 Royal. But then I saw another tweet that said, a lot of people say that Persona 5 Scramble is a sequel to just 5, but no, it definitely has some Royal elements in it that it hints at. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know what it is, obviously.
I'm not sure. My kind of like, I obviously don't know what happens in the game, but my kind of understanding is that it's kind of like, it's like Schrodinger's sequel, to where it's like, it's not quite a sequel to 5 or Royal, just to kind of accommodate, like, if you played the original or Royal, so it doesn't freak people out too bad, So, like, you're not going to see Maruki show up or whatever it happens to be, but that's kind of my thinking.
So I am curious if there will be any real connections to Royal, because I know it was basically developed simultaneously. So I'm curious. Although I do want to talk about one last thing before we finish, is the alternate endings.
Yeah.
What did you think of them?
Okay, so obviously the two that come to mind, the first one is the one where you just straight up fail to, like, get to his treasure in time, and everybody's like, man, this palace is tougher than we thought, and then you kind of just, like, accept it, And then there's the one, I think this is the one where you take Maruki's offer, is the one where everybody's at school, everybody's all happy, and at one point, I think you're going down from LeBlanc, and this is the only time when anybody acknowledges, or the game acknowledges something is weird. You have one option to say something's wrong, and then Sojiro's just like, what? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. And it's really creepy, because it's like, you could genuinely mistake it for just being like the good ending, But it just has that ever so slightly ominous, like, something's not exactly right kind of energy. And I think it's a really good bad ending.
It is. I like that ending because it's not a bad ending. Like,
it really isn't. Like, depending on your interpretation of just, like, what is and isn't good, like, you could just as easily say, I thought this ending was better.
There's that whole part with, like, I do like the part where, you basically find out from Sojiro that you're going to stay. And it makes me wonder, is that Sojiro's wish for Joker to stay, or is that Joker's wish to stay with Sojiro? It makes me wonder. And it's just kind of an interesting little thing. And it's, of course, you meet up at school and you actually get to see the graduation of, what is it, Makoto and Haru?
Yeah.
Is that who it is? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of fun because it's like, in no other situation would you ever see this. It's only because of this ending that you even get the chance to stay and see it.
Yeah.
And, of course, Akechi, it's kind of creepy that Akechi is like, just his old self, like he's the Detective Prince version of himself.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, Akechi's just like, oh, I'm pleasant.
Yeah, and it's just so uneasy. And then there's that, the best part of that ending, though, to me, that I never, well, I guess I understand is, you see Maruki show up and he's in like the flat cap and he has that big old coat on and he's like, hey, let me take a picture of you guys.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, sure, whatever, weirdo. And, and he walks away, and then there's that part where they're all talking, and then like Joker turns to the side and does the evil laugh or whatever, and it's like, I just think it's so funny that they give Joker an evil laugh because he's giving everybody everything they ever wanted. Like, that's like a super evil intention. Because like that's something Maruki wouldn't do. but apparently Joker would do. You know what I mean? Then you have the other, like you said, the other ending where you run out of time or whatever, or you don't reach a decision, I think it's what it is. And Maruki basically forces you, and he puts his tendrils around you, and he basically says, like, sweet dreams for as long as you may live. And then it just shows you. Did you see this ending?
Yeah, I did. That
one's so creepy. And then you're like in bed and you just feel tired, and then you see the butterfly disappear. That one's so dark. Much darker than the other ending, I think. Any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Yeah, like, I think the third semester of Persona 5 Royal, like, not only met my expectations, it really did exceed it. Like, you know, Persona 5, it had an okay, like, story. I think the story of Persona 5, at least for me, was its weakest sort of aspect. But this, I can confidently say, had an amazing, like, really well thought out story that I thoroughly enjoyed. It had a lot of themes I really liked. It had a lot of characters I enjoyed. Like, it really just came together as something that, like, really affected me, you know?
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I mean, I definitely walked away from Royal thinking about it a lot more than I think I ever did, well, at least the ending to Persona 5. And it just felt like it really felt like it elevated Persona 5 more than anything. And like I said, I had a bit of a bad taste in my mouth from the ending of Persona 5, and this did everything to remedy that. And yeah, I mean, it really does feel like the fully definitive game in my mind.
Yeah, I feel like this is something that you see a lot. It's like, people are always like, oh man, the first, like, part of Persona 5 was really good, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse. And it's like, I feel like now Persona 5 has something, like, really genuinely good and strong to end on, which I think in, like, the long run is gonna really help its just, like, reputation and how much it's kind of enjoyed by people.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're always going to have those people who say, you know, Persona 5 is an overrated game or whatever, but now they at least have to try to make a case for Royal being overrated. And I really do think Royal adds so much that, you know, to me, it was definitely worth the day one pickup, even if it was overpriced. I was very happy with how it all turned out, and it just really makes me curious and excited about what they're going to do from here. Like, they could go so many ways at this point. I just don't know what to expect at this point. So I'm definitely very satisfied, and I hope that if they ever do make a Persona 5 Arena, Maruki better be a playable character.
Oh man, that'd be sick if he has, like, Azathoth again. Because, like, obviously Adam Kadmon's not gonna work. Unless it's, like, really shrunk down. Maybe that you could do that. But Azathoth just has so many more possibilities for, like, interesting gameplay.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I'm losing faith that that's going to happen, but just because they announced that new game from Arxis, but we'll see. I don't know. Anyhow, well, I think that might about do it for me. Unless you have any final imparting words.
Nope, not particularly. I think, like, Persona 5 Royal really, really did a lot for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Like, this, like, third semester, I feel like is kind of the Persona 5 story I always wanted, you know? And so I'm just glad it exists.
Me too, man. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I hope that we didn't go too long for your audience or my audience, but there's just a lot to talk about, and it's just fun to go in depth sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me. This was a lot of fun. We've been going on, I think, between our two different parts, it's at least 2 hours worth of, like, listening material.
Well, hopefully that'll give everybody a bit to chew on. But yeah, so for anybody who might be watching this who's from my side of the tracks, I doubt that's many. You guys should definitely check out anything else that Fither has put out. The entire reason I pretty much started my channel was just because I was inspired by his stuff. So if you're interested in content that's reminiscent to kind of the stuff that I do on mine, Fither has tons of stuff on here. So
yeah, likewise, definitely go check out PK. He does some pretty good videos, I would say.
I only got a few, but I'm definitely working on more. I've got a lot planned. Just I've been working on limited time, but I finally gotten to a point where I can really start to be more consistent. So. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. We'll see you guys next time.